Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Cedar Falls Board of Education with a reminder that the actions taken at this table will focus on our students and their achievement. With that, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Hassman. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Sasha Wolpert. Any questions or comments? All in favor signify.
Sorry,
Yeah, I'm
I
sorry.
should have been quicker. No, just the nursing agreement that we've got, how does that compare with the agreement that we had previously as far as coverage and cost and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so it's really comparable with the coverage. So we've added a building since we had the first agreement with Mercy One. So we've had more coverage and more people added to it, but as far as the number of time and staff and buildings, it really hasn't changed. And they've just been tremendous to work with and certainly put together not only a great presentation when we first went to them after Black Hawk County let us know that they weren't able to continue on with that contract about a year ago. What they provided and what they've continued to provide and what they put together in the contract is really favorable for us as a district and I think as a partnership.
Is the cost similar to where it was before?
It's gone up a little bit just because of the time allotment and time that we have devoted with adding a new building and then trying to make sure that we have coverage across all of our buildings for the same amount of the amount of time in each of our buildings. So the cost has gone up. The first time and the first contract was really built on the specific amount of contracted hours that were utilized. So it was kind of we're going to pay this amount plus any extra added time. So we have a much better knowledge and base working with them for the last year and a half as far as what that actual cost will look like. So yeah, very comparable, very, very similar with the additional time because we've added a 7th elementary.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. Moving on now to public comment. I have not received any.
We have not, nope.
Okay. Communications. Marika Yang will do the student body report.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
So at the high school, Student Senate has started to organize the Do Better, Be Better Color Dash this year. It will be at Cedar Falls Prairie Lakes Trails on Saturday, April 20th at 9 a.m., so mark your calendars. And registration will begin at 8 a.m., or you can register online at www.getmeregistered.com/do-better-be-better-dash. So you can register ahead of time if you'd like to as well. Volunteer Club will be volunteering at the Hearst Center for the Arts on April 23rd for Earth Day. And this past weekend, the high school's musical production of Cinderella was a great success, so congratulations to everybody participating in that. And last Monday, Rocket Club presented at the John Deere STEM Festival on their launch vehicle project. And then Mentors in Violence Prevention will also begin their next round of health class mentors in the next few weeks coming along. And last Friday, the men's basketball team won the state championship, so congratulations to them as well.
Thank you. Any questions for Marika?
So do you have to actually run, or you can just sort of dash?
You can run, walk, dash, whatever you want to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So if you're not a competitive runner, you don't have to.
No, you don't have to run. You can walk, and there will be lots of colored powder, too, so you'll get a lot of colors.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, moving on to the newsletter. Dr. Petty?
Yeah, so Janelle's not able to be here this evening, so I'm going to present the communications update and some of the aspects that Marika talked about as well. It's kind of a duplication in some cases. Obviously, on Friday night, our men's basketball team won the state tournament. This is their second consecutive state tournament, which was just really exciting, not only for them as a team, but certainly all of our coaches, parents, and our community. They do a great job exemplifying what it means to be a Tiger both on and off the court, which is really neat to see. Marika mentioned this as well. There was a wonderful production of Cinderella that was put on by our Cedar Falls High School students this past weekend, and it was remarkable and certainly great reviews from the different presentations that were provided. or performances that were provided. I apologize. This one's cut off a little bit, but this past 2 weeks we actually had our Cedar Falls Tigers Special Olympics team participate in the Northeast Area Spring Games, and certainly excited to see them participate in that, and certainly just do with tremendous effort. Really neat to see this at Holmes Junior High. This was tweeted out, really talks about what we try to embody for students outside of our classroom walls, learning from other people across not only the United States, but sometimes across the world. And this was during Parasite Day, but connecting with an expert down in Mississippi, really working to try to expand opportunities for students to engage and learn about different aspects of education. This is our AP Environmental Science students. They just recently participated in the Northeast Iowa Youth Institute at Hawkeye Community College. Really neat to see not only them talking and learning about global food security, but really helping to feed local students by packing over 2,000 backpacks for Northeast Iowa Community Food Bank. So really neat opportunity. And there's Marika there in the back row. So. Another aspect, we had a really neat opportunity. This is for the Iowa Regents. This was down in Ames, I believe, here a couple weeks ago, where we had our CAPS program. We're able to present to talk about that partnership between UNI as well as the CAPS students. So Mr. Weekman, as well as one of our former students who's currently at Iowa State, since it was on the Ames campus, were able to talk about what they provided, what they did, and what came out of those CAPS experiences, which was really, really neat to see. This past weekend as well, another huge accomplishment, the 525 Swart Dogs, which is our robotics team, won the Northern Lights Regional Competition up in Duluth, Minnesota. And this is not only great for our students, but certainly recognition for our mentors. We have a huge amount of volunteers that work directly with the 525 Swart Dog students. And Carmen McIntyre received the Woody Flowers Award, which is really significant because it goes to one mentor from across all the different teams. And you could have 20, 30, 40 mentors sometimes with some of these teams, times 60 teams. So she was recognized for that award as a really impactful mentor. And we now have, as a team, 6 Woody Flowers Award winners. And we believe, I didn't fact check this, but it came from very, very good sources, that we are the only team in the world that has 6 Woody Flowers Finalist Award winners. And that is amazing. And robotics is worldwide. School calendar update, just as a reminder for everybody that we, due to our strong and weird weather systems that we've had move through, I think we've all said we do not want to ever hear the word polar vortex again. We are going to add 15 minutes of instructional time to the end of the days. Student last day will be June 6th then, and that just extends then the normal dismissal time 15 minutes. We are going to have on Thursday, March 28th at 6 p.m. an opportunity for people to tour Aldrich Elementary to be able to see just those spaces and what that looks like as we continue to talk about high school facilities and spaces that are really built around student collaboration and student opportunities. Monday, April 1st at the high school, we're having a community event that's Let's Talk Mental Health, community conversation. You can see the schedule and the session topics, but very excited about that event, and our counseling department district-wide have really put a lot of time and effort into this. Finally, if you are not following us, please follow us on social media. There's so many great things that are happening each and every day that are highlighted across multiple platforms.
Thank you. Any questions for Dr. Pattee or comments?
Quick comment, Jenny and I did get a chance to see Southdale. I know all of our board members tried to take an opportunity to look at our professional learning communities, and it kind of ties in with our extended schedule, and some people have suggested that maybe we eliminate those Wednesday afternoon PLCs, but watching the work that those grade level teams were doing was so tremendous and so beneficial, I think, to our students. I'm glad that we have held firm on those and that we're going to continue to honor that time for our teachers.
I think that's such an important time and impactful time. It truly embodies kind of what we are as a district. It meets our mission and our vision, and certainly every student every day, that's what that time is devoted to ensure success for all kids.
I think they also added, we talked to them a little bit about one of the teams about the 15 extra minutes, and they were very considerate and deliberate about how they're using that time, when they're implementing that time. They're thinking about where to put that time during the day to keep schedules aligned and to make students not feel like they're going through a longer day. So, I mean, that was even it was just rewarding to see that how well they're looking at using that time rather than just throwing 15 minutes on the end of the day, so.
That's great to know. Thank you for your comments. Anybody else? Okay, let's move on to item E on the agenda to set a public hearing for the 2019-2020 school year calendar.
Yeah, so Iowa Code is really has now dictated some of the school calendar aspects. Within your board packet that's on our website, I think we brought this to the board as more of just a discussion item a few months ago, but we are ready to set a public hearing, which would be for the next board meeting, on our 1920 school calendar. The school calendar is pretty straightforward. It really follows along the same parameters as what we've had this current school year. The one aspect that changes, though, is we have always typically try to have a partial week when we start with students because of the Iowa Code requirement that we can't start on or before February or August 23rd. That moves us to Monday the 26th. And that is the same date that UNI is starting classes. It's the same day as we worked with regional superintendents to start classes because we know starting at that time frame then allows us to have the breaks as necessary when we look at the end of trimesters or the end of semesters because we use both of them throughout our district. When you look at different breaks, we try to align those breaks in similar form and functions across the district, and this would allow us to be out June 1st. I know we've talked about this as a school board in the past. We don't build in snow days. We add those onto the end, or inclement weather days, and we do that because if you build in a snow day, say April 7th, you don't go to school on that day, it automatically pushes the end of your school year to June 2nd. If you build in a second snow day, say sometime in May, then you push the end of your school year to June 3rd. So it doesn't really recoup anything unless there are days that you are planning to go if you don't have any inclement school days. So it's one of those aspects. We know this is a unique year, but this is always a topic of conversation. But again, we try to map this out as a very similar to our current calendar and past calendars, especially with now the parameters of when we can start and when we truly look at for the number of hours and number of days that we have for our student learning.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to set a public hearing?
I move that the Cedar Falls Community School District Board of Education approve April 8th, 2019 at 5:30 p.m. as the date and time to hold public hearing for the 2019-2020 school year calendar.
Thank you, Jeff. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded by Susie. Any further questions or comments?
Andy, I have a couple questions. One was there talk in the legislature, we know really the reason that we have this imposed start date is in large part due to the state fair. So knowing the state fair is ending, the 18th, I thought there had been some discussion that they might waive it to start earlier in that week. Is that gained any traction, or?
It is not. You know, that started with a pretty robust conversation, and they've come back really to say they're not going to make any adjustments to school calendars in the current year or for this upcoming school year. That doesn't mean that something couldn't come back up in another bill, but that did not come out of Funnel Week, which is one of those aspects we had hoped that there would be some flexibility, but
The tourism lobby probably stepped up, I'm assuming.
that is, yes, and again, that goes back now, 2 or 3 years ago, where the August 23rd date came out because of the state fair timeframes.
So my other question was, at one point when one of our previous board members had been on, he discussed, kind of circling those the rest of that week in June as potential snow makeup days, just
Yes.
to let people know flat out, if we are going to have snow days, that is when those are going to be. Is there a reason we've now gone away from that, or
No, we always do that. We just, in this iteration, this draft, it's not on there, so we'll make sure we get those highlighted to make sure that those are delineated. The only challenge is we typically delineate about 4 days, just so people know. In this case, this year, we've had many, many more. So we just have to make sure that we kind of put down the little asterisk that days missed due to inclement weather will be then subsequently added on past those days.
At least then people do know, without any doubt, that we will add on to the end of the year. So if you are planning vacation, probably not, I mean, if you are going to be planning to leave on June 2nd, your kids are going to miss some school. So at least we've then done our due diligence with communicating that and
Yep.
making it very clear.
Yes, we'll get those circled. That way, it's, it's listed down below, but we want to make sure that that is well known.
Good catch, Jenny. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Moving on now to item F on the agenda, the 2019-2020 school year budget proposal, and set a public hearing. Danelle.
Yes, if we can pull up the PowerPoint for me, please. Fantastic, okay. So a little background in the school funding and how it works. The funding formula was developed by the legislature, and as you can see by the different bullet points, the idea behind it. It's supposed to bring some equity in expenditures, but it brings property tax relief. It's pupil-driven and provides local control and discretion. But probably the most important item is that it establishes a maximum spending control for every school district in the state, and it's the same formula for all K-12 public schools and AEAs. As a reminder, we all work through the same process to develop our district budgets. There are 4 key factors for the foundation formula. The first one is the enrollment, and this is based on the number of students in attendance as of October 1st, which is, for our purposes, October 1st, 2018. Equalization, the legislature established the law that cost per student across the state will be nearly equal to every student has equal access to education. Supplemental state aid, the third one, the governor and legislature control the annual increase in dollars per student. The formula sets the expenditure ceiling in each school district, total spending authority, and tells the district how to fund its spending authority.
So number 2, equalization, just as a reminder, and I know board members know this, but that's been a point of conversation across the state, and the legislature's been trying to narrow that amount of cost per student across districts, and really the work from Davenport to the last several years, as board members know. But there is a difference of about $160 when you look at the highest cost per student in districts in the state and the average cost per student, the lowest. In this past legislative cycle, they did try to narrow that band by $5. So that was dollars that were invested to be able to kind of close that gap. But again, we have to say nearly equal because it's not equal across districts.
And finally, the balance, which is the ratio of property tax and state aid. So this is just a reminder from a legal perspective of Iowa Code Chapter 257.1, talks about how the funding formula will work, and it breaks it down into actual 4 categories, which is the aid and levy budget worksheet. It implements the school foundation aid formula. It calculates the amount of spending authority. It determines the maximum spending authority, and then determines state aid versus property tax. So we'll start with certified enrollment. As I mentioned, it is one of the 4 key components. As you can see, the enrollment for October 2018 was increased this year of 110.1 kids. The red bar indicates the number of CF kids that attend the Cedar Falls Community Schools, while the gold bar indicates CF kids that are enrolled out in other neighboring districts, for a total of 5,237.6 children this year. Special education is also a large cost associated with the budget. This shows the historical percentage by the number of students in level 1, 2, and 3. You'll note after a number of years a decline in the graph, but it is starting to tick upward. With the numbers trending up, it's most likely the larger special education costs and a potential increase in excessive costs over revenues received.
And just to be clear, this is percentage of total student body, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So because we've grown enrollment over the course of the last 8 years, the numbers could be very similar, but the overall percentage has decreased slightly.
Yep.
Okay. This is the history of the supplemental state aid and percentage. It is what the district has received and the state has set. You'll note that the dotted line is the state amount and the red line, and it's kind of difficult to see, but it is what the district has received. You'll notice that there is a slight increase over the past 2 years, so for what the district has received. One of the things we like to review are districts that are similar to our size. Last year, Cedar Falls was ranked 17 out of the top 25. This year, we have obviously moved up to 16, but we do review the top 5 above us and the lower according to enrollment. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yes, and you just said it. I was going to say this is by enrollment for student population across the state of Iowa. So we're the 16th largest district in the state of Iowa.
Yep. And as you can see that we have gained 110.1. There are some districts that obviously have negative money, which have negative students declining in enrollment, such as Muscatine. This is several years in a row that they have had negative money and declining in enrollment, where others have had increased enrollment as well.
Do you mind if we could go back one slide?
Back slide, sure.
Yeah, just to clarify, so the difference between the I'm gonna call it the hashtag line, dotted line, and the solid line. So the I'm gonna try and paraphrase, and then you just confirm. So the dotted line is what the state legislature has approved as far as an overall increase in supplemental aid, and then the solid line would take into account obviously any increases in supplemental aid as well as increases in enrollment.
Correct.
And so that's why, for example, it looks like we're suddenly up, nearly 4%, but it's because our enrollment, it's not like we've got suddenly this windfall of money that we're having to educate a lot more students, and so we've got increased costs. So yes, we're getting more money, but we have more expenses as well.
That is correct.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure I understand.
And it's behind.
And
a
it's 1 year in
And
arrears.
it's
Yes.
1 year in
Yep.
arrears.
And it's 1 year in arrears, yes. Thank you.
Sure.
And can we go back one more?
Sure.
Because I just found interesting where, if you look at the percent growth, that we're one of the top growing districts. What are we? Yeah.
We are, and that's true across the state historically. I think we've grown about 19% student population since 2006, 7 school years. So that ranks in the top 20 of school districts in the state.
And you'll actually see on the next slide a 3-year cumulative of certified enrollment, which will show that. Cedar Falls had 185.5 over the last 3 years of kids enrollment, where there are other districts, obviously, that have lost students or have gained. Pleasant Valley, obviously, 504, which is an anomaly, but the others have slowly gained as well, too. This is also similar size schools, a 3-year average increase of supplemental state aid. Again, this is 3 years. The Cedar Falls Schools has had supplemental state aid of $900,000 over the last 3 years. Other schools have had negative amounts, such as Muscatine, as I had indicated, they had lost of students, but others have had larger because of enrollment growth and other things associated with that. So Cedar Falls, the history assessed valuation. Of course, when talking about property tax and what rates are going to be and dollar property taxes are going to generate, school districts go off assessed valuation. Cedar Falls has been very fortunate in assessed valuation as it continues to grow at a nice rate, as you can see by the chart. The red bar is the regular associated assessed valuation, and the gold bar is the TIF, which is added to the total amount. And you can see that it has increased over the last several years at a really nice rate for us.
So just to be clear on the TIF, we don't actually get, does that get counted in the formula for supplemental aid or not?
So TIF gets counted and generates dollars for us in 2 of our special accounts, the PEPAL account and the instructional support levy, but not in the general fund dollars generated. Those are excluded from that, but we do know that as we look at the purpose of a TIF district, those are eventually going to be rolled into the overall assessed valuation that we utilize for our general fund dollars, and that's going to continue to grow.
Yeah.
And this actually is just a snapshot of what TIF increment basics for the basic financing. It's used by cities and counties and communities, colleges since 1958. It establishes a base valuation of prior year's taxable valuation level. The revenue on base valuation goes to all taxing authorities, and the revenue on incremental valuations goes to TIF projects with some exceptions. So to review the assessed valuation per student, this shows that the state and district valuations, you'll see the red line indicates Cedar Falls schools, while the yellow or gold line indicates the state median. This year, obviously, it has continued to go up, the assessed valuation. This year is the first year in a while that the Cedar Falls schools is a little bit higher than the state average. But as a reminder, when enrollment increases rapidly, change to assessed values don't always keep up, and so that is why you can see a change from year to year. Okay. Here's the base. The base valuation for our neighboring districts. Cedar Falls is pretty favorable. We are at the state average and above quite a few others as well. So, and these are neighboring districts. And then this is just our 3-year comparison to our neighboring districts as well. And you can see we continue to be above that state average, or at the state average. So the next slide is the valuation per student of similar size schools. And this again is the 5 larger and 5 lower for the enrollment. And with the exception of Ames and West Des Moines, Cedar Falls is pretty comparable to all the other districts. Those are anomalies on the outside there. And this actually shows then the 3-year comparison for our similar size schools.
So I would say again, just looking at this slide, this is an average as far as valuation per student. So you actually could be a district that is losing enrollment, but you could be having a 3-year increase of valuation per student just due to the fact that your valuation's kind of flat or stagnant, but fewer students mean that you have a higher average. So it's good to see that we are a district that continues to increase enrollment, but we also have the valuation per student that is growing on an average because of the growth due to the fact that our city leaders have planned for appropriate growth across our community.
Okay. So the next slide actually gets in kind of the thick of things. This year, or for fiscal 20, the combined district cost is $6,880 per student. How that is determined is by the legislative action. So each school district per code must levy $5.40 per 1,000 assessed valuation, and this is what's called the uniform tax levy. And as you can see, that generates approximately $1,844 per student. Then the state comes back and fills in on that foundation level, which is the 65% or 64.87% for $4,463 per student. And then the local district obviously comes in and backfills the remaining for the $572, which is the 8.32%. So in the short of things, the state contributes about 65%, and the local district contributes approximately 35%. This is just a quick glance of the history of the cost per pupil. As you can see, it has slowed down over the past few years as the legislature has not been able to fund at a robust rate as it has in the past. This year there was a little bit of an increase, but as in years past it has slowed. This is a historical combined district cost. So again, this shows the 65% of the state aid versus the property tax at 35% of the local. So now we get into the aid and levy budget workshop. Each of you should have received in the packet the breakdown of the aid and levy, but I'm going to try to break it down a little bit further into smaller chunks. So the $5.40 I mentioned on previous slides is what the school district needs to levy. And in our case, it's $11,160,769 for a tax rate of $5.40. There is no 101 budget guarantee. If you recall, for fiscal 19, that was something that we were enrolled in and had. We do not qualify for that for next year, so we do not have that. And then you have the final state foundation aid, which is $32,514,000, which includes your teacher salary supplement, your professional development, teacher leadership, early intervention. So there is an additional levy included in that, which is that backfill in which I was talking about. So that total is a net of $5,360,000 for a property tax rate of $2.60 on an average. So to bring it all together, the uniform levy is $16.5 million for a tax rate of $8. Again, we are not in the budget guarantee, the 101 guarantee. We do have the dropout prevention, which was approved by the Board of Education on January 14, 2019, if you recall, which was $882,000, and that property tax rate would be 42 cents for a total tax portion of $17,663,000, or a tax rate of $8.42. As a reminder, primarily the majority of it is set by the legislature, but the board does have control over the dropout prevention portion of it, and the budget guarantee if that's applicable.
And with dropout prevention, this is more historical, but the legislature roughly 8 years ago put a cap on the amount of dollars that can be generated for dropout prevention for students that are classified as at risk, and that was 5% of your overall budget. But at the time, you were capped at what you expense that year. So we actually expense about 2.5%, so about half of the dollars that were legally allocated 8 years ago, but they capped that at the dollars you spent for that fiscal year. So we were actually under what a lot of other districts are allowed to spend for that those prevention dollars.
And there's another aspect, though, of special education that is a property tax assessment, which would be on top of this.
Yes.
It's coming up.
It's coming up.
Oh,
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Nope, that's part of the SBRC. Yep.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah, it's okay. So this is just a combined district cost tax rate comparison with our neighboring districts. Again, you'll see that Cedar Falls sits rather favorably within our local districts. We are the second lowest, which is fantastic. Again, this is another graph that shows the similar size school comparison. So again, if you remove Ames and West Des Moines, again, we are sitting very favorably within those particular similar size schools at $8.60. The next is the history of combined district costs and dropout. This just shows the breakdown over the years and dollars generated. As a reminder, for fiscal 19, this was the year that we were included in the budget guarantee. So you'll see it's very small, but you can see a yellow line within that between the red and the gray bar there. And this just shows the tax rates for the dropout and property tax rate. You can see that it has been pretty consistent over the years. And again, in fiscal 19, that did include the 101 budget guarantee, which will not be included in fiscal 20. So now we're on to the instructional support levy. This is included in the general fund for reporting to the Department of Education. It's a 10-year levy approved by our voters, and it's district approved for fiscal 22. It is 10% of the regular district program cost, which is $3.6 million. You do have to take less the gross ISL state aid, which is about 22%, so $824,000 removed, so a net property tax of $2.7 million. So for the property tax rate, it's $1.28 per 1,000 assessed value. This just shows the dollars of property tax revenue, and you can see that it has increased a little bit from each year to the current year itself. This is the tax rate again for the ISL. It's been very consistent, and it's not really varied more than a couple pennies over the past few years, and again this year it's $1.28. So now moving on to the cash reserve levy. There are two parts to this. The first part is the dollars that the district requests to the SBRC or the School Budget Review Committee for different items. This year, the board approved the following, which were the increased enrollment of the $741,000, the ELL, which is English language learners, $16,000, $98,000 for LEP, which is limited English proficiency. And then we have the special education on top of that, which was the excess cost for the district of $467,000. This year, you'll note that there is an additional SBRC request of $574,000, which was for the startup of Aldrich Elementary. This is new. Obviously, we have not opened up a building in quite some time, so this is not a normal request that we would have, but it is included in this request. The total SBRC approved for request is $1.898 million. And again, all of these costs were brought to the board and approved at various times, and you can see those particular dates on the screen.
In the special education excess costs that decreased from last year, we do anticipate that going into next school year, we'll probably look at going up. So that's just one of those aspects year to year, depending on whether or not the cost to educate students with special needs is not always funded at the actual cost. So that is something that, as we've talked about several different times and was approved back in October, is something that we then come back and cash reserve levy for.
And this is the second part of the SBRC, which is for cash flow needs. This year, we are looking at $400,000 for fiscal '20. That is less than the past 2 years. In the past 2 years, we have requested $600,000. With the new building expense and increased enrollment, the cash flow is needed for the district at this time.
So that does not give us additional authority, but allows us to utilize our authority to be able to have cash so we could have more liquidity.
So in summary, and in the board packet, this was there was an error on this, so this has changed in compared to the screen. But the SBRC approved request was 1.8. The cash flow was $400,000, which was the total cash reserve of $2.2 million, for a total tax rate of $1.11. The change was the total cash reserve amount. This shows the dollars that are requested and how that is allocated accordingly compared to the cash flow to the SBRC request. This is the history of the tax rate levy. As you can see, it has increased just slightly, and that again, that is due to the fact of the SBRC for the new cost associated with Aldrich Elementary. So in summary, for the general fund, we have a total of combined district costs of $16 million. We're not in the budget guarantee for fiscal '20. The dropout is $882,000. Instructional support levy is $2.7 million, and then the cash reserve of $2.2 for a total of $22,479,000, which is a tax rate of $10.81. This just shows that the operating property tax revenue for the following year. And then this shows actually the tax rate, which I found interesting. It's been flat the past 2 years, but if you look for the past 6 years, out of those 6 years, the 4 years were 1081. So it has been consistent and has been flat at that 1081. So now we get into the C&I, or the commercial and industrial replacement estimate. This began in fiscal year 2015. With the rollback was 95%, beginning in 2016 was 90%, but the district is estimating at a 90% prorated payment for that particular fiscal year. And you'll see on this next screen how that is calculated and determined, and the general fund for C&I replacement is approximately $496,000, and the instructional support levy is $73,000. This chart looks at the local revenues, which are not state or federally funded. These are other revenues that the district obtains, such as the interest, open enrollment, the rentals, facilities. These are the projected local enrollments for fiscal 20. These are the state projected revenues. As you can see, the combined district cost is the $24 million. These are categoricals. You have your 4-year-old preschool at $567,000, teacher leadership of $1.7, early intervention, and so on and so on. These are all the state categoricals that are projected revenues for fiscal 20. And then you have your projected federal revenue, which is all your title programs, your Head Start, Medicaid, and your TAP. The big thing that I want to remind everybody is that the federal funds is if there's any impact in the federal funding, obviously those estimates could be dropped and not have available for fiscal 20.
And the one I would point out is Medicaid in the middle, and that's important. I think as we've talked, the excess costs for students with special needs above and beyond what the state allocates. We have a large amount of staff that work very diligently to try to get reimbursement for Medicaid costs, and that helps cut down on the actual special ed deficit that we might run. And again, approaching $1 million to be able to have some of those reimbursable costs back into the district from the federal government is really impactful as far as our local levy rates.
This is a pie graph that you can see that 55% of our revenues are from the state. 3.3 is from federal, and the remaining 42 is the combination of local, property tax, and other revenues. So it just shows you an idea of where those dollars come from. So that's it on the general fund. We have management fund that we are moving into, which now I'll walk through. But management fund is a restricted fund. It can only be used for those items that are listed on the screen. And for fiscal year 20, we are estimating $500,000, which is a drop from 18-19, fiscal 19, and also a tax rate of 24 cents. This shows the history of the management fund and the revenue, and again, it shows the drop of requests from fiscal 19 to 20 for fiscal 20, and then the next slide shows the drop in the tax rate. The physical plant and equipment levy, again, this is restricted funds and for two parts. The Board of Education controls one of those, and that's the 33 cents per thousand, which we call the regular PEPL. The voters graciously approved the renewal of the additional $1.34 levy for 10 years, which was on December 6th of 2016. The levy now expires 2028. And it can be used again for these particular items. This is not an all-inclusive list, but it is a good review of those items that can be purchased with the physical plant levy. As a reminder, this fund cannot be used for salaries and benefits. This just shows the amount for fiscal 20 of $716,000 for regular and $2.9 for the voted, which again is the 33 cents and the $1.34 for a total property tax rate of $1.67 per 1,000 assessed valuation.
I think it's important to note, as the board well knows, that this is part of our 10-year physical plant and equipment planning document. So these dollars that we receive then go towards some of our preventative maintenance, roof repairs, some of the other upgrades to our properties to make sure that they are upkept and well maintained for the life cycle and the lifespan of the buildings.
This shows again the dollars that would be generated from that regular and voted PEPL. And then this shows the tax rate, which has obviously been consistent over the last few years at $1.34 and 33 cents. Now we have our debt service levy, which again is another restricted fund. It is primarily used to pay the district long-term debt. Just a reminder, the community did graciously approve the $32 million bond that on April 5th, 2016. For fiscal 20, the amount requested is $2.4 million for a property tax rate of $1.12 for a 1,000 assessed value. And this will cover the principal and interest on that tax rate. You'll see these are the dollars that will be generated for that, and it's a 3-year. We did not have any long-term debt for that, so there's no other history for it. We've just had the 3 current years. This is the tax rate levy, which you can see that it has been slowly decreasing, which, as a reminder, as the assessed values increase, the tax rate should decrease. So this should continue to decrease at a rate. So this year, again, it is $1.12. So in summary, with the general fund and all others, you can see that the general fund is the $19,700,000. You have the instructional support levy of 2.7, the management fund of 500,000, the voted PEPL of 2.9, the regular PEPL of 716,000, and the debt service levy of 2.4 for a total of $29,040,944 for a total tax rate of $13.84 for fiscal 20. This graph shows the history of the tax rate, and you'll see that for fiscal 20, the tax rate did decrease by 10 cents, and it has slowly decreased over the past couple of years. This also shows the difference between the tax rate and without debt service, should we not have had that debt service. This is the property tax breakdown, which for every dollar in property tax, this provides a good example. 56 cents of that goes to the combined district costs. 8 cents of it is for debt service. 3 cents is for dropout prevention, and so on. So that is how that's determined and where those particular dollars go for each dollar spent. This is the property tax breakdown, which again is the combined district cost of 57% and is controlled by the legislature. The 28%, which again was voted, is voted PEPL, the instructional support levy, and the debt service. And then we have, 15%, which is board controlled, which is the dropout prevention, cash reserves, management fund, and the regular PEPL, and if the budget guarantee 101, if applicable. So this is just a comparison of the tax rate from fiscal 19 and fiscal 20. As I indicated earlier, you'll note that in fiscal 19, the tax rate was $13.94 or 95, excuse me, and for fiscal 20, it does drop the 10 cents of $13.85. Anything to add?
I think that's really important to note, and again, we really try to focus on that overall levy rate, and having a decrease in the levy rate from last year to this year certainly I think shows the work that Danelle has done, and certainly looking at the board as trying to be fiscally conservative to ensure that we continue to look at favorably as other districts across the state that are growing, but also making sure that we are trying to decrease that levy rate overall.
The next slide shows the property tax revenue comparison versus 19 and 20. You'll see that it is an increase of 1.2, but again, that is a result of the increase in state aid as well as the cash reserves for those dollar increase.
So doing the quick math, so that represents about 4.5% increase in total property tax revenues, right? But overall, as far as if you're a property tax owner, it's going down about 1% based on the previous slide as far as the assessed. So if your assessed value didn't change from year to year, the school portion of your property tax bill should go down almost 1%.
So
Am I doing the math right?
if all things remain the same, but there are some things that are completely out of our control, which will be coming up, which is what the revenue board sets statewide for the residential rollback. And the residential rollback is a percentage that your assessed valuation is counted towards local property tax assessments. And we'll see what the rollback has done over time, which is something that we cannot control.
Okay.
So I guess in essence,
Maybe.
ask your question in about 3 slides.
All right.
Okay. So this is the total tax rates, similar size school comparison again, and with the exceptions of Pleasant Valley and West Des Moines, Cedar Falls has the lowest property tax rate. So that is favorable with those comparisons. So now we get into the rollback and in that question. This is just a reminder from the legal perspective of the Iowa Code 441.21, but rate adjustments are determined by the Iowa Department of Revenue. So the history of the rollback, which impacts property tax, has increasingly been steady increasing. Was a drop in 2017, but bounced back again, and with an increase this year. Again, this is determined by the Iowa Department of Revenue, and it does have an impact on the property tax itself. So with your question in regards to that, so because of the rollback increase this year from 1819 and 1920, the decrease in tax rate, the levy rate, but an increase in property tax, and that's because of the rollback. You'll see that in 1819, net amount was $710 for 100,000 assessed value, where in 1920 it's $723. And again, that's because of the rollback change. We really concentrate on that levy rate to lower that. But with all things equal, had that rollback stayed the same, we would have had a decrease of over approximately $3 per 100,000 assessed value. So because of that increase in the rollback, it did impact this year.
So left alone and just ours, so I'm doing the quick math again, which maybe is dangerous, but we would have, our overall assessed rate on a per thousand basis would have gone down about 1%. But as a result of the residential property tax rollback, then actually that switches it to going up almost by 2%. Is that, you do the 723, 710?
Doing the quick math, that would be correct, yes.
So it's almost a 3% swing from, because we're going from -1 all the way up to 2% increase.
So-
Because of stuff that's out of our control. It isn't like we decided to do anything, or the district from a management standpoint tried to do something else. It's just how the formulas and the levers and the rules that we've been given to play by work.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So this next slide will show that the difference in change from 1819 to 1920 for each 100,000, 200, and 300,000 home, the change in property tax. So budget timelines. Tonight, obviously, we were discussing the budget, looking for publishing that budget on March 25th, and then having the public hearing on April 8th, 2019. Before that, we do need to discuss the school budget amendment for this current fiscal year. As you can see, there are 2 sections of the code that allow for that. The amendment is not for expenditures that were not anticipated when the budget was created a year ago. A reminder, it's not an increase in property tax, it's only the authority to utilize other sources of revenue and reserves.
So I think this is where it's really good to clarify. Some districts, what they do is they ask for the school board to set a budget that's basically their max authorized spending authority. So we have $100 million, that's our spending authority, for example. Some districts will say, we ask you to be able to approve a budget that spends all those dollars at those ceilings. We always go based on our line items and specify what each of our areas are going to be as far as the expenditures based on the needs that we have. So at times there's expenditures, as Danelle stated, that come up that weren't necessarily anticipated, so that adjusts our line items. Typically what that means is it's a shift of when those dollars are expended from a prior fiscal year to a current fiscal year, or anticipated to come in a future fiscal year, but it's still dollars that are allocated and budgeted to spend.
So you'll see for this year, for the 18-19, we are actually requesting an amendment for all 4 categories. There are 4 categories. The instructional total support services and non-instructional programs. That's all associated, majority associated with the Aldrich Elementary startup costs, the transportation and utility costs. There were some additional staff for expense cost as well as then the food service startup costs. So those for the three. Then we have the other expenditures, and that's really due, as Andy indicated, shift to the project timelines to fiscal 19 and substantial completions of the project. So all of these are projects that were planned in the 10-year plan, but they may have shifted within fiscal 19 versus fiscal 20. So again, this does require a public hearing, and those timelines would be associated as indicated on the screen as well.
So going back to
Yep.
that previous slide, so how many, so for example, you look at the last one, we're amending our expenditures, I mean, it's a $5 million swing. Are we actually spending more, or we're just spending it sooner rather than later?
Well, it depends. Some of it's sooner rather than later, some of it's later rather than sooner, because of when the substantial completions occur. So we just finalized a substantial completion for the kitchen equipment at Aldrich last board meeting. That was scheduled to be paid out earlier because that's when it was installed in the previous fiscal year. But what happens is, because of timing for training, sometimes punch list activities, sometimes going through inspections and other things, that substantial completion isn't signed off until 9 or 10 months after it's been installed or completed, just because of the requirements of the work. So some of these are actually dollars that we're spending early. It's not more money than we anticipated spending, but some of it's dollars that we anticipated to be spending last fiscal year that are now in this fiscal year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, you kind of answered the core of the question is, because you could look at this and go, well, gee, you're spending, I mean, why are you asking for so much more money in every one of these categories? And so kind of the core of the question is, you know, is it, did we not budget well? Or is it hey, just as things were lining up on these large projects, this is money that we're already planning to spend, but we have to do in a budget amendment to spend it now versus it spilling over into the next fiscal year?
It's timing. And, you know, when you have $40 million of expenditures for projects within about a 2.5-year period, some of those timing pieces, and $5 million looks like a lot of money, which it is, but it's the timing of the project. So we're trying to make sure that we spend those at the right time frame when those projects have substantial completion and those bills come due.
And most of those, except for the instruction, are one-time costs and not recurring costs, is that correct?
They are, and when you look at, say, food service and the startup, it's not even general fund expenditures. So it's trying to make your best estimates. When we set the budget last April for what an elementary startup is going to look like, and trying to do that conservatively and fiscally responsibly, and then having those actual costs come in. So it's making a best guess, because we've not started a new building for 40-plus years in our district, and we try to estimate what that's going to cost, and in some cases we were under, some cases we were over.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the school year budget proposal and set a public hearing?
I move that the Cedar Falls Board of Education direct the secretary to publish the budget estimate and notice a public hearing as required by law in the Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, and that the public hearing for the 2019-2020 proposed budget be held at 5:30 p.m. on Monday, April 8th, 2018 at the Cedar Falls, so that'd be 2019.
No.
2019 at the Cedar Falls City Hall, 220 Clay Street, Cedar Falls, Iowa, 50613.
Thank you, Sasha. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further questions or comments?
I would just state again, with the levy rate decreasing, I think that's really what we're trying to focus on and be very cognizant of. We know that when they adjust the residential rollback, that has impacts, and impacts out of our control. What we can really focus in on is that overall levy rate.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you, Danelle. Moving on now to item G on the agenda. Do I have a motion for the 2018-2019 school year budget amendment and set a public hearing?
I move that the Cedar Falls Board of Education set 5:30 p.m. Monday, April 8th, 2019, at the City of Cedar Falls City Hall, 220 Clay Street, Cedar Falls, Iowa, as the time, date, and place to hold a public hearing to amend the current 2018-2019 school year estimated budget expenditures.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded by Jenny. Do I have any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Danelle, thank you. Thank you. Moving on now to the superintendent's report. Dr. Pattee.
Yeah, so the first item that I have is a presentation that talks about some of the petition information process, and then really just to kind of do a review and overview. This is a little bit of a longer presentation, so I apologize about that, but I will try to condense down some of this information, because this is information that everyone on the school board has seen now multiple times, but I think it's always good to keep in front of people regarding the work that we have in front of us with the new high school in that process. So just to go through a couple different slides, we really try to work hard on trying to discover the why behind why this is important, try to strategize about what and what does this look like as we move forward, and then finalize the how as far as what solutions need to come to life as far as facilities in the Cedar Falls High School project. As the board knows, roughly about 14 months ago, we had something called Insight Week. We brought together multiple constituent groups, staff members from the high school, students, and over a 4-day process really gathered a lot of information to be able to look at what do we need to do for the next 50 to 70 years as a vision for the Cedar Falls Community School District and our Cedar Falls High School. Several key principles came out of that. We want to make sure we have safety and security. We want to make sure that we have expanded learning opportunities, not only with the location, but for students and staff across the board. We want to optimize efficiencies and make the most out of taxpayers' investment in our local school district, because certainly that's what this is about, is investing for our students and our economic development. You'll see here the 4 key principles. The next few slides really focus in on that. Enhancing safety, as we've talked about, not only is that for the building security and safety as a single entrance, but also parking and flow, and ensuring that we have sites that allow for students to be able to walk and bike to a new high school site. We also talk about the high school location and a new location, having great access and opportunities to partner with UNI, as well as spaces that can be efficient in use for co-use recreational spaces, and I think we've done a nice job of showing how that can work with the tennis court projects. Again, improving and optimizing efficiencies, that collaboration is something that we know is important, and as we look at how do we spend public dollars to maximize outcomes and use, we know we can do that better collectively than doing that individually and being redundant with some of those spaces. And I think that is so exciting about the location as we look to the new high school. Efficiency, and I know the board has looked at this, as we look at the existing square footage of the existing high school, what a new high school could be as far as the efficiency when you look at design and how that would flow, not only educationally, but efficiency of all of the mechanical systems, and compare that to what it would mean by the existing high school adding on to. We know a new high school just provides so much more fiscal efficiencies, environmental efficiencies, educational efficiencies than what we can provide with the existing high school with renovations. And you just look at the cost per square foot and the overall square footage, it's really enormous in nature. So as we continue to talk about maximizing taxpayer investments, and this is really focused on this current fiscal year, we know our levy rate's going to go down, as Danelle just presented. We are, of the largest 25 school districts in the state of Iowa, 16th largest, as Danelle pointed out. We have the 3rd lowest tax rate, and that includes the elementary bond levy in that. So you can see, just as a continuum, this goes all the way from West Des Moines and Pleasant Valley on the left. Cedar Falls is 3rd lowest. Orange is the state average, and even with the high school bond, which we'll talk about, we're going to be right about that state average. And you can see then where the districts are at as we go about the largest districts in Iowa. I think it's important to note that some of these districts have just recently passed a bond. Ames just passed I believe, $110 million bond, which we'll see just in a bit for a new high school, as well as Waukee. So these tax levy rates will continue to shift, and that average will continue to go up, which puts us even more on the low end. Impact of SAVE, and I think this is important to note. We have the Secure and Advanced Vision for Education. We've asked the legislature to move that sunset from 2029 to 2049, but you can see we have used those dollars very effectively. But why this slide here is important is we could use those dollars allocated if the sunset is moved towards offsetting the cost of a new high school and be able to come in at a very, very reasonable rate for the investment in the high school. So you can see capacity needs, several different bullets that we've talked about as a school board, school district for multiple different times. I think bullet number 3 is important. Roughly 20% of the current high school is used for learning not required or expected when the building was built. You think about 1976 with the Individual Disability Education Act, and in 1976 we did not educate students with special needs, typically in public education. Now we have over 20 classrooms dedicated for the right reasons, for the right work with students with special needs. We did not have robotics. We did not have over 70 classes of higher education, college level classes and courses that were taught in the high school. Those are programmatic needs that we've continued to expand over time. In the current building, over roughly 20% of the building is used for things that were above and beyond at that current time. We also know in the future we're going to grow with significant growth as a student population anticipated. And sometimes you'll hear, well, that just doesn't seem like we're going to grow that much. You look back historically. We have grown about 20% within that 10-year time frame, and that's the 18th largest increase in the state of Iowa. And I think that's pretty significant to say, yes, we know in the future we're going to grow. Hindsight, we've grown as well, and very important to understand and address. So we know that there are some top questions, the why, and we do know education's changed, the needs of students and staff has changed. We also know that we need to be able to respond for the sake of our students to make sure that they are economically vital. They have the skills necessary to move our local economy forward. We have multiple business and community leaders that are trying to attract and retain employees. A new high school, in our current high school, we have limitations on what that can provide. A new high school certainly allows us to continue to meet those needs. Reuse of the old high school, we've talked about that extensively. Parts of the building need to be torn down. There are parts of that building that were not designed nor have the threshold to be able to be viable into the future. But we also know that we can work with, and we've proven this, to work with the city to repurpose some of the recreational spaces at the high school and also utilize some of the redundant spaces that we have in the district with our IT department in one location of our community, but that's separate from our instructional technology, which is 4 miles away from our technology backbone framework, and we can move into spaces at the high school efficiently and effectively to be able to reuse that site. And you can see nothing wrong with the current building is a question that sometimes come up, but again, we talk about a lot of times people only get into the front sections of the building and aren't able to see what the inner classrooms look like, the limitations, the fact that the building's been added on to 13 different times, and the lack of efficiency that comes from that structure. And here you can see that and this is a slide that we've shown multiple times, the building's been added on to 13 times, interior rooms that don't have outside windows, classroom spaces and hallways, usable spaces that just aren't efficient or fluid, and the average square foot is 54 years old within the building. Multiple areas have not been touched or remodeled. We've also talked a lot about the footprint of that site. It's 17 acres for that site. We know that we are using most of the site as efficiently as we possibly can. You can see where students park at. The safety and access to the site is very challenging. And if we say we want to just remodel that building and add on to that building, you can do that, but there's no more space to add on. You are landlocked and confined, and you could invest $70, $80 million into that building, but be over capacity in the next 10 to 12 years, so it's dollars not well invested. And I would say the dollar amount off to the bottom left is important. If we say let's add on and buy additional square footage and acreage, it's about $1.5 million per acre to acquire the residential properties, to be able to tear down those properties and be able to turn that into usable green space. And you talk about just ineffective and inefficient use of taxpayer dollars, $1.5 million per acre to try to add on just is not cost effective or efficient. Sometimes you hear too, number of acres, or we're going to build something that's larger or too big or maybe too fancy. We are fiscally conservative in a lot of different ways, and I think our budget proves a lot of those in different ways. Here is just acreage per sites. We know Johnston just finished a new high school that opened last year, and we'll show some pictures of that. Waukee just passed a $116 million bond for a new high school, their second high school, and they have a 100-acre site. We believe our 50-acre site for the new proposed high school is efficient and effective because we can cost share some of those green spaces and use those efficiently with you and I. The huge outlier here, as you can see, is the 17 acres of our existing site. It does not meet the needs as we look to how do we educate our kids effectively and efficiently. This is something we always point out and think it's important to point out. Our existing site, 17 acres. Have we looked at other options? Yes. College Square Mall is 31 acres, and that includes multiple successful businesses right along University, and that is well below the recommended amount of acreage that is recommended for a high school with the number of students that we have.
And it's not for sale.
And it's not for sale. And the assessed valuation is roughly around $31 million. In the renovation costs, the turning those into green spaces that are all blacktopped or hard spaces is not effective use or efficient use of taxpayer dollars. One of the things that we truly try to metric is the square feet per student, because it's pretty universal what the cost is per square foot for a high school or a school building. Those are regionally benchmarked, they can be Midwesternly benchmarked, they can be United States benchmarked. So what we try to do is have the right size on an average, and again, design development will test this, but to show we're not trying to be so large or outlying based on the square footage allotments of recent high schools. It's hard to believe Ankeny Centennial was finalized 7 years ago and built 7 years ago, so they bid their construction probably 9 years ago. When we look at current and most recent high schools through design development, the proposed Ames High School, which again was a recent bond of $110 million, and the Waukee proposed high school, which was a bond of $116 million that both communities passed, you can see their square footage allotments are fairly significant. We believe we're kind of in that framework to be somewhat average. So when we look at Cedar Falls, one of the questions that comes up is, that location. It's starting to be a little bit more on the western side when we look at the new location. And I think it's important to note two things. Number one, when we were a community, when we built the original high school back in the early 1950s, we were a very much smaller community. You can see where we've grown and where we continue to believe we're going to grow into the future. The number of homes being constructed, the growth across our community, and the importance to note, 91% of home buyers consider schools one of the most important factors when they look at buying a home. And you think about that. And I think one of our previous public commenters talked about not only families buying homes consider schools, but also employees that might be relocating to the district and consider schools. So I think it's important to note, schools in Cedar Falls, our reputation is tremendous. The programming we offer is outstanding. We are limited with our high school facility on what we can do and what we know we need to do as we look to the future. Staff is awesome. Curriculum is great. We can't do some of the things we know we need to do as we look at that facility, short-term, long-term, and certainly maximizing the investment in those facilities. This has been shown several times. The left slide, the little red box kind of in the middle of that screen shows where the current high school sat in 1950. And when that was built, people that remember that being built, everything to the west to Hudson Road was farm fields. The shaded red area was the residential core of Cedar Falls in 1950. Today, you can see the white box in the middle is the current high school. You can see the residential infill that the community's had, and then the little yellow asterisk where the new high school site and land is purchased. So you can see as we trend out over the next 50 to 70 years, there's a lot of that land that's been residentially purchased for residential development. We know that the westward expansion is going to occur. We also know that as we look at the next 50 years, how do we create that site, that plan to make sure we meet the needs, because this should be a 50-year investment, not a 10-year investment as we look at maximizing dollars. So we've tried to pencil out cost, and this is looking at the existing high school. And as we've shared several times, I think at the board table, you look at the overall cost as far as just adding on to the current high school. That's 76% of the cost of a new high school, but that means it's about a 12-year vision because there's no additional land acquired for that high school renovation in addition at the current site. So if you want to compare apples to apples and you start looking at what happens if we acquire land around the current high school to ensure that we have the right acreage, it's 118% of a new building. And I think that's important to note as you look at trying to purchase acreage and land around that site. It becomes so cost prohibitive that it makes more sense to invest into a new building that's A, more efficient, B, safer for students, and utilizes a vision for 50 to 70 years instead of a 10 to 12-year vision for our district, for our community. So going back to that, and it goes back to the efficiency of the site. We are trying to use a lot of that site in a lot of different ways, but it's still not large enough for what we know we need to do as we continue to grow in our enrollment, knowing that the building, 20% of the building is being used for things that were never even considered or we knew about when that building was built and that building was even occupied back in the 70s or early 80s. Education's changing. The needs we have as a district are changing. The needs of our employers and the needs for readying our future employees based on the education, the quality, and what we can do within the facility is extremely important. So this is the summary. We've seen this multiple different times, but we know the current facility and the current structure limits us, is inflexible, has higher cost to be able to remodel and add on, and is not an efficient or effective investment as we look to the future. So we do know what's come out of that is kind of that strategy and that site planning. As we look at that new location, the access to the location, the ability to be efficient and effective, to be able to plan for the future, and we know the land around that site is going to continue to expand with residential, mixed use, and other growth. So what does this mean as we look at the future? And these are slides that we've shown in the past. Collaboration. Spaces that allow us to not only have students work collectively together in unique ways, sometimes small groups, sometimes large group, but our staff as well. Mr. Overs spoke earlier about that importance of our collaborative teams and the work that we do on Monday mornings and Wednesday afternoons needs to be enhanced and utilized effectively in spaces that accommodate us into the future. So this is just one rendition of what could be. Other areas that are open, inviting for our community, because we want our community involved with our students, working collectively hand in hand. Our CAPS program is a classic example of that, and we can do that at a much wider scale with areas that allow our community, our students, to work collectively together. These are just, again, renditions, design development we have to go through, but ways that we can have student seating area, comfortable and flexible and adaptable, but get away from the mindset that you have to eat in a cafeteria. Sometimes we do our best work in kind of that coffee shop mode where students can talk and collaborate collectively, to be able to use the Wi-Fi, to be able to have different seating arrangement, not necessarily just in seats and rows, but also spaces that allow for much more creativity, flexibility, adaptability, which are spaces that we have in some of our elementaries, spaces in some of our newer spaces across our district. That is crucial for, I know, what we need to help our students prepare for, but also things we can't do within our current high school facility. So we have a very robust website. We've talked about this. We've got a very robust communication strategy. We've already had one community meeting. I think there are about 40 to 45 people in attendance. But on our website, we have frequently asked questions, and I think it's important to denote, have other districts passed bonds recently to be able to move forward with projects? Iowa City passed a $191 million bond. I think the next two are important. Waukee and Ames both passed bonds for new high schools. $117 million in Waukee for their second high school. Ames to replace a high school that's actually a little bit newer than our current high school on their current high school sites of $110 million on April 3rd, 2018. We believe that we can build a high school that meets our needs as we look to the future for a total cost of about $112 million. One of the things that I think we've talked about quite a bit, there is a cost for doing nothing, of a cost of inflation of about $3.3 million per year. About $1 million every quarter we say we're not going to do it, and construction cost, inflation costs are that expensive. They add that much more as we look at trying to find a solution. There are things that we've looked at as far as what are our comparisons. What do we know we need to have as we look at serving our students the right way? And we know a new high school, those green items, meet those needs. The existing high school doesn't meet a lot of those needs. Even a redeveloped high school doesn't meet all of them. So that's an issue that we have to be able to be attentive to. So this is kind of a really important slide. We believe we can do what Ames did for a $110 million bond, what Waukee did for a $116 million bond, for about a $69.9 million bond, and have the same outcome as far as a new building. Danelle did a wonderful job talking about assessed valuation increases across our community. Over the last 10 years, with growth, with prudent planning by our city leaders, our county-wide leaders, we have had an assessed valuation increase of about 3.92. We're conservative as a district, so we are saying let's use the 5-year, because there was an outlier in that 10-year assessed valuation increase of 2.91%. You can see that the initial impact, because we would use SAVE revenues for the SAVE extension to offset the overall cost of that bond, and again, have a lesser impact locally at about a local tax levy rate that would pay for about 62% of the cost of a new high school. The district with the SAVE revenue would pay about 38%. And you can see the tax impact, if you use a 3% overall levy rate, how quickly that goes down with that lime green line. So what would that mean? Anticipated cost of $100,000 assessed home per month over a 20-year period, because that's as much as we can go for a bond. First year, it would be about $10.77 for a $100,000 home. It almost cuts in half by year 20 because of our growth based on that 3-year assessed valuation. And we think that's important to denote as we look at the cost out of pocket for that investment. There's a cost for that current high school site. There's a cost as you look 50 years. But again, the investment and the impact on investment makes sense as we look at what a new high school could provide. So what does this look like in other districts? This is Johnston. They just moved into their high school last year, so they're in their second year. They've really designed this building around that collaborative format, basically similar square footage per student as we looked at those averages previously. They have some really unique spaces that are really focused on student creativity, a lot of spaces that are adaptable and flexible, but spaces that are really designed with the current student, the future student in mind. Again, a lot of different seating arrangements, a lot of different comfortability areas, a lot of that flexible spaces, because again, our students are getting they have to get used to being able to be in these environments that are much more in collaborative, inviting as far as the business world than have ever been in the past. Again, they were very mindful and thoughtful in their design and very good design in a lot of different ways. So we did survey our community. This was something that we learned about this past meeting. A lot of different feedback, had a very high rate of respondents of over 1,700 people, which was a very high turnout. And people seem to be pretty well knowledgeable about the need. And they also know that we need to look at voting, or we're likely to vote in a referendum. So it's something that we think that there's knowledge about. So what does that mean for tonight? nothing to vote on, nothing to decide or look at, but we know, and it's kind of a weird process, we can't do anything unless our community asks the board to move forward with a general obligation bond. So that comes from a petition, and you can see that there's, at each of our sites, a petition component that lists the language for a bond referendum that our community actually has to move forward with, to ask our board to act on this. It cannot be a board decision. It has to be a community petition. So you can see, basically, there's a petition there that says, we, the undersigned, are eligible electors, reside within the school district, and petition the board of directors to move forward with the following. And the language is, shall the board of directors of the Cedar Falls Community School District in the county of Black Hawk, state of Iowa, be authorized to contract, indebtedness, and issue general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $69.9 million to provide funds to construct, build, furnish, and equip a new high school building and to improve the site. So that is something I just want to make sure that everybody says and is knowledgeable about, because we have to have this come from our community, not be us as a school district or a school board that moves forward with this. We have to have about 450 signatures, all based on Iowa code and aspects. There's a window to do that, but it certainly has to come from our community, which is a great process, but it's all delineated in Iowa code. So I gave you a 57-slide presentation in what seemed like a short time, but it probably went on forever for some of you. I apologize for that. Questions, comments, thoughts?
So the new high school would have a capacity of 1,400. That would be the target capacity. So how many current students do we have right now?
Right around 1,220 to 1,250.
1,220 and 1,250, okay. So what's with our, I guess a two-part question. So our existing high school, I mean, obviously we've had to move a portable in there. What do we think is going to be our enrollment growth at the high school over the next couple of years? And you know, when do we think we'll, you know, is 1,400 enough for right now?
So that is always the question as we look to the future. We are going to, and plan would, to size the building with the public spaces, the general spaces, the open spaces to accommodate probably closer to 1,700 students. Because we know once you get to about 2,000 students, typically in the state of Iowa, that's when districts look to have a completely separate building. We would also design this building similar to what we've done with a lot of our other elementary buildings to be able to be added onto if necessary as we continue to grow. We believe that 1,400 would allow us to be able to serve the students that we see as growing into our high school for the next 15 to 20 years. But at that time, we would have the spaces, the common spaces that would accommodate many more. And there's a way that you can add on additional classroom spaces to what we would design. Typically, you can add on classrooms for what you'd think of as a traditional classroom for about $250,000. So if we needed to add on capacity for another 100 students, it would, at this day and age, not be what we would consider an unattainable addition. But as we look to the future, we think that that would be very easily and fluidly done.
Any other questions regarding the presentation or the petition process?
So for the petition, if viewers at home, you know, in the community want to sign one of these and aren't able to get in touch with one of us, where can they access a petition? Should they reach out to the district office or to their student's school if they have kids? Or
Yes, we will have them available in different locations. Janelle's been working diligently on that. We'll have them in some community and public spaces. We'll have them in different buildings if people would like to come in and sign those. The most important part is this is a petition to ask the board to move forward with this. It's not a position of advocacy. It's not a position of encouragement. It's really a position to ask people to civically get involved. So they will be located across multiple different areas. Okay.
Good question. Any other questions or comments?
Trying to regurgitate a lot of that information that we've had over the last several months into kind of a succinct and concise presentation. We'll use a lot of these backbones and presentation as we go out and talk to staff, as well as more community input sessions. But we know this is what, as we look at the efficiency and effectiveness of spending our dollars, as well as just serving our students, makes sense.
Well, and it's important that we communicate this with the public. So we want to make sure that we continually have the conversation at the board table about what we're going to do as we move forward with the high school. So thank you for bringing it front and center again for us tonight.
Thank you. The other things I have down is April 8th, we have our next board meeting, which will be our public hearings with budget and calendar, and then April 22nd, we will have CAPS to provide an informational report. Still working to finalize when we can reschedule computer science. There's just a lot of different schedules to work with that, but certainly we'll have that take place sometime in the near future.
All right. Thank you. Any questions or comments or concerns from board members?
So just to clarify, our next board meeting is April 8th?
Correct.
Okay.
All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Been moved by Jeff Hassman. Do I have a second? Sorry, Susie. Seconded by Susie Hines. Any questions or comments? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thank you.